Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. Today we are at episode 6 of House of the Dragon. It's been absolutely shooting by, but I am delighted that I have back for the second time this season the wonderful Aziz from History of Westeros. Aziz, do you want to say hi?
I sure do. Hey, everybody. Hey, Robert. It's great to be here. We're having so much fun with House of the Dragon. All the great week-long discussions every week throughout the season and surely continuing into postseason. It's just great to have this vibrancy in the fandom and have so much. It feels lucky that the show is this good. We couldn't have asked for this type of reaction and this type of result, and so I'm just grateful.
Yeah, I don't think luck's got much to do with it, but there was a huge amount of hard work went into it. But yeah,
That's
absolutely,
sure.
I agree. It's astonishing. We get 5 episodes in, and they've all been absolute stormers. I mean, after every single one of them, I came away thinking, "Wow, that was a really good episode." I mean, it's not dropped pace at all. What's your sort of? I think you were here before episode 2, so I think we'd only seen one episode at that point.
Right.
Have you got any sort of overarching thoughts? We've got a whole load of questions we'll get to in a moment, but have you got any sort of overarching thoughts about how it's worked as an adaptation so far?
Well, it's worked really well, and despite the challenges. Obviously, for the most part, people are enjoying it, and a lot of people are enjoying it thoroughly. It's rating really well. Obviously, whatever your own opinions are, it's hard to deny the success of it to this point. But it was a risky, maybe not risky, but a difficult thing to take on, trying to handle 28 years of timeline, roughly speaking, in one season. Doing a lot of time jumps, especially this one we're about to have, which is by far the biggest time jump we've ever seen in a Game of Thrones type situation. And that is, I'm sure they felt, curious what the reaction would be, maybe a little nervous as to handling something new. And we're going to look back on it maybe as fairly unique. Maybe other successor shows will come along and do time jumps of this length as well. But the rest of the run of the Dance of the Dragons portion of House of the Dragons won't have big time jumps. So the season 1's going to look pretty unique, even within the framework of the other seasons that it's connected to, because we'll have month to month, week to week, a lot more action, a lot more battles. So I think while it's also amazing, I think we're going to end up looking back on this season as pretty unique. Not just because the time jump, because of the change of actors, and that is a big deal.
And if this is going to turn into a show which covers a number of different eras, so if this does go back and do Aegon's conquest, for example, this could be a model that they sort of follow, actually, the time jump idea, because on that, if you're wanting to cover the entirety of, say, Aegon's invasion and then rule, you probably would have a few 2 or 3 year time jumps in between, after the first bit of invasion, before the dawn, that kind of thing. So yeah, this is, I think this has been a huge success, not just in the acting, the plot, or the writing, things like that, but also the way that they've managed to overcome it. Even things that you could easily mock. Look, Paddy Considine has done an amazing job, but he can't look 20 years younger. When you have the 101, the Great Council, he's looked the same age pretty much as he did all that time later. But so despite that, I think it's been fantastic. One thing before we get into the detail of this for the stream, I just want to say this is a charity live stream. All of my live streams through the House of the Dragon season 1, as well as the Rings of Power, are charity live streams in aid of Alzheimer's care and research. If Alzheimer's has affected you, anyone who you love, you know quite what a horrific disease it is. And what I'm doing with this is just saying, if you're enjoying the show, if you're appreciating these live streams, if you have some money to spare, I would love to invite you to donate. There should be a button somewhere on your screen now to donate to that. Thank you. I hugely appreciate that. We've got up to, I think last time I checked, $3,700. If we can push, and we're about halfway through the seasons at the moment. So if we can hit that 5,000, I'm pretty sure we can hit that 5,000. That'd be fantastic. So let's see how far we can get through today. But the other thing, before we get into the questions from my patrons, I just wanted to touch on. Last time I had you on, you were fresh from interviewing the big man himself, George R.R. Martin. But you followed that up with another big interview with Ryan Condal, who is the showrunner of House of the Dragon, who was co-showrunner for season 1. He's the showrunner going forward for season 2 onwards. Do you want to just give us a feel for that? What's he like? How did he come across to you?
Well, he comes across as an extremely disciplined, competent person, just the way he presents himself and speaks and talks about whatever you're talking to him about. Because I've also watched other interviews with him. That was part of our preparation that we do. And before we interview anyone, was to try to look up any prior interviews with that person to get a sense of what they respond to, what they like to talk about, and to not repeat questions, to not ask things that they get asked before. So with that, we hope to have a few new things to talk to him about. And he really is a person that's been a big fan of movies and the creation of movies and TV shows. That's this is the thing we nerd out about, you and me and everybody here. We love to watch and engage with and read about these fantasy worlds and the characters within those stories. That's our thing. That's the thing that we spend the most of our time on. Ryan Condal is someone that spends his time thinking about how movies are made. That was his nerd obsession. He's his particular niche is props. He has a props podcast with David Mandel, who wrote episodes of Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm, and a bunch of other things. And this isn't exactly a big show. It's not some heavily downloaded podcast, but these are two very big names that have been doing the show for years, and they just talk about famous movie props, like the sword from Conan the Barbarian or the wings from Birdman or anything like that. And so that was a thing that we enjoyed talking to him about, was the incredible props on shows like House of the Dragon and maybe some of the successor shows. And of course, had to ask him if he had plans to steal anything, and he basically said yes.
Yes,
more things, implying he had already perhaps taken a thing or two, but with more to come.
Well, I mean, I think that's fair. I think we can probably
He's
forgive
the showrunner.
He is the showrunner. One thing I was intrigued by, because I know we talked about this after your George R.R. Martin interview, was and you got into this with Ryan Condal, was how does this process work with him and George R.R. Martin in terms of when he's coming up with a change or something new? And there have been a few things in this show that's been a bit of new lore, a bit of extra knowledge. Obviously, the Aegon's prophecy, but there's also a few bits of information about Valyria which have been dropped in there. How does this work? Ryan Condal is running the show, so he's got the sign off on everything, but how does the process work with George R.R. Martin from what he says?
Well, it sounds like there's a lot more respect taken with the material and an understanding of, hey, if we're going to change something, maybe we should talk to the guy who wrote it to make sure we're not stepping on a landmine or digging ourselves into a writing corner that we can't write ourselves out of. So the man who wrote it get his input and say, okay, if George says this isn't a good idea to change because it'll make this further plot line more difficult to write or manage, then maybe that's the kind of advice I get the sense that goes back and forth between them. Ryan implied, well, I don't think he implied, I think he said straight out that he texts George regularly. And if we look at the way George spoke about his communication with, say, Dave and Dan, it wasn't nearly as robust. They didn't speak nearly as often. So that right there is ostensibly a great thing, that they're taking a lot more advice from George directly, or at least Ryan specifically is. And of course, we also know that one of the consultant in the writer's room, T. McKell, is one of George's writing assistants as well. So she's much closer to him than anyone involved with the first Game of Thrones was as well. So there's just a lot of connectivity and community amongst the people who we all would have more in common with if we were hanging out at dinner than a lot of the people that were involved with the first show. And I'm not trying to I'm not going to insult the first show. I'm just saying that the type of people making this show are more like we would have more in common with. Not that that's not a bad thing that we wouldn't have had as much in common with, say, Dave and Dan and that group. But these are people who are more like invested in the books. Like Ryan Condal's read Fire and Blood multiple times on his own, right, as a fan, whereas I don't get the sense Dave and Dan like read the books over and over. They read them for sure, but I didn't get the sense that they were obsessed with them, that they listened to podcasts and things like that. Well, there wouldn't have been podcasts back then anyway, but you know what I mean, that level of interest, they more saw the potential for it as a TV show, whereas Ryan is a experienced showrunner who specifically really loved this as a fan before getting involved, and that means having a respect for the man who wrote it, and still got to make some changes here and there, got to make some painful adaptational choices, but with George involved, those will be kept to a minimum and handled with a much greater level of care.
And I think this shines through in what you could see as like fan service. Like, oh, here's a bit of mushroom, or here's the brackens and the blackwoods just like constantly at each other's throats, that kind of thing. Or, oh, look, the Royces have actually got a nice bronze breastplate with some runes going, that kind of thing. But there's so much of it that it's actually moved beyond fan service to actually, this is just care for the world and trying to put across the world that is there without doing any shortcuts. The other thing I wanted, go on.
I was going to say real quick, it makes the core fandom like we are. It makes us radiate excitement, which brings, we become advertisers for the show, even not counting our podcasting and videos. It's just when we talk to our friends about it, we're excited, and that spreads the word. Unlike, some other shows that come out, people are more lukewarm about, and that they lose the ability to get that word of mouth.
And it's there very clearly as well. One of the things which, when you look at the viewing figures, HBO do release viewing figures. They've gone up from week 1 to week 2 in particular. They went up, which almost never happens on a TV show, because what generally happens is that people watch episode 1 of a show. Many people may like it, but quite a few people just don't. It doesn't work for them for whatever reason. So week 2's figures are almost always down for even really good shows. But this went up a little bit, which shows that actually what happened was word of mouth. And I think that we all kind of know that, people ask us and say, was it any good? And it's like, yeah, it was really good. It was well worth watching. And so you've seen that, I think, that all the way through this, that the level of interest has remained high. In fact, I think probably even grown as the season's gone on.
Even I believe last week was another 3% up from the week before. So you're right. It's really unusual to do that. It's just more, rather than losing people, it's gaining people. Which,
which is what incidentally happened with Game of Thrones on a slightly bigger level, obviously. But that started off smaller, and then each season it grew and it grew and it grew, and it was word of mouth between seasons, which was what made Game of Thrones grow to the huge size it was. And this has started out much bigger than Game of Thrones started out. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be bigger than Game of Thrones, the original TV show, but it's had an amazing start. But I did before we move off from Ryan Condal, the other thing I wanted to just ask you about, because I saw that you talked to him about this, was the handling of magic. Now,
Yeah.
I thought it was a really interesting sort of just little conversation there about the Game of Thrones. The first book is very low fantasy, other than the prologue and the very last chapter when we have the others and the dragons kind of like bookending it. There's a couple of bits in the middle with Bran and so on, but generally speaking, it's low fantasy.
Yeah.
But this retains that kind of feel, but we've got dragons. So what's the kind of flavor of, what did you take from that discussion with him about how he's handling magic? Because we will have a couple of potential magic stuff bits happening in the future on the show. What's your sort of takeaway from what he was saying about that?
Well, I think that he looked at the way Game of Thrones handled the supernatural, which was they tamped it down. They took a lot of it out, and they were wary of how audiences would handle that. And they thought the best way to do that was to minimize it as much as possible. And I think it looks like they were wrong about that. It looks like the fans and casual fans would have been very happy with more magic, more mystery, more supernatural stuff. I mean, you and I know as YouTube as creators, there's always a lot of interest in that sort of thing. That's always a nice bonus. People are often gravitate towards that because it's fun, right? It's neat to see those kind of things. It's endless possibilities and creates mysteries of grand scale. So I think they took note of that and said, well, this show has less magic in it, but people responded to that so well that we should emphasize whatever we can, as well as maybe add a little, which they did with the prophecy, which was a very nice thing to do. It seems like the audience responded well. We've responded well to that. It's been really fun, generate a lot of extra discussion. We didn't see it coming, and which was nice. And it's been added a different level of energy that we wouldn't have necessarily expected to be there. And that means there should be more of that. We'll see what they do with certain other Fire and Blood plots that we might not have thought were actually going to be such a big deal. Maybe they are going to be a big deal. Some of the stuff that happens in the North maybe will be more important. Alice Rivers, they might go a little farther with that. Yeah, there's a lot of possibilities. So I'm without just those, or with just those in mind, that's exciting. But this whole Aegon's prophecy thing was not in Fire and Blood, so that shows us that they might add something else that fits nicely, maybe something that connects to later lore, something that sets other things up, maybe something that alludes to some of the other possible successor shows. I mean, we've already seen that with the multiple mentions of Nymeria and having Rhaenyra be interested in Nymeria. That's a little bit of groundwork for a possible Nymeria show. Even if that show never happens, they will have at least done a little setup for it. So, and it's fun even if it doesn't happen.
Yeah, and just as you were saying that, it struck me there is another prophecy which it was sort of hinted at coming up here, which is the Hugh Hammer prophecy, where for those he's a dragon seed. He appears later on in the plot, and has these dreams of grandeur, which appear to be based on some sort of prophecy to do with a guy with a massive hammer taking the crown from the Targaryens. We don't get any of the detail of this, but we're supposed to immediately think, hang on a moment, that's what happened with Robert Baratheon. So are we going to see the origin not just of the prince that was promised, prophecy, a Song of Ice and Fire, but also a prophecy about Robert Baratheon? Could this be something which comes up during here? If so, who's going to have it? Who's going to get that prophecy? That's fascinating. And another element, we've got questions on this, so I will circle around to it. The Weirwoods. This is something that I would love your take on, because it's been very present without having much of a focus on. But I will come back around to that.
Cool.
Is there anything else from Ryan Condal you wanted to talk about, or should we get on to Kristen Cole?
I guess we could move on now. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we've got a lot of questions about Kristen Cole. So we knew beforehand that Kristen Cole would be quite controversial character. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
it's hard. Anyone who's read the book will know they have opinions about Kristen Cole, and they're usually quite strong and they're usually quite negative. And what they've done here on the show is nuance it a little bit. I would say give us a different perspective. That doesn't mean we like him now, but I think we perhaps understand him a little bit more. But let's start with one from Diego Godoy saying, Hola, Robert. Hola. Regarding Rhaenyra's decision to not run away with Kristen Cole, how much of it do you really believe is driven by her feeling of responsibility toward the realm? In other words, how much of it is just keeping her status versus how much of it is her feeling the responsibility to take on the A Song of Ice and Fire prophecy? I'm leaning more towards the former than the latter. I find this fascinating because that whole scene felt like she clearly viewed him as not just like a random lover, but she seemed to be about to tell him the whole prophecy. And then he kind of stormed off. Was that your reading of it? And if so, does that mean that she has or had these strong feelings for him?
I think she did have strong feelings for him, and her view of the situation was something that maybe they should have discussed it beforehand. They both made pretty tragic assumptions about what the other wanted from their relationship, but his reaction was far more damaging and his I think her read on the situation and how they could make it work was more realistic. But yeah, I do think she was maybe about to tell him, or at least hint at that there was maybe not directly tell him or give him more information, imply that she took it seriously in some way, frame it in a way that showed that the responsibility was a really big deal, and that throwing it away would be sort of like what he sees as an important thing from his honor perspective. But yeah, I think that he went a little too far, maybe a lot too far with his expectations, and didn't really need to blow both of themselves up like that. I guess it didn't actually work that way, since Alicent forgave him or just saw the opportunity to make him an ally. But yeah, just very, very destructive, but not unrealistic. I think we've seen that kind of thing in real life where people take rejection pretty hard, and they pin their hopes on something that they assume the other person will accept or sees the same. But she didn't really see that the same as him. Did she, Robert? She seemed confused by his offer at first, as if, remember, she said, "Are you asking me for leave to to go?" She totally, this idea was unfathomable. The idea of abandoning the throne was, yeah, just never crossed her mind.
No,
So,
and it seemed almost as if they'd not had this conversation or any bit of this conversation before. Is they,
yeah,
what were their expectations from this? They'd never actually talked about it. It was just they were in the heat of the moment, and then they were being on official business and not talking to each other. It was, they never actually discussed what is this between us, what do we both want from this, what's the future here. So and I don't know, Kristen's he didn't really pick the best moment, did he? It's like
no.
yeah, it was on board a boat, which I suppose, away from many prying ears and the Red Keep, but at the same time, it's the I've just noticed that you've got engaged, so I'll give you an ultimatum now. It was a bit,
Yeah.
I mean, it felt in character, but I don't think he handled it particularly well, which kind of leads into the next question. Emma Scheinman saying, how do you feel about the breakup on the show? They essentially went with the story that she dumped him, not the other way round. I love that they also took care to show us why he turned so strongly to the Greens after Rhaenyra snubbed him. I want to sort of spin this, Emma, if that's okay, towards the sort of the difference between the books and the show here, because the books this was probably the thing I was asked the most about in the lead up to this, in terms of what are they going to do on the show here, because the book left it so open. Here's a few different possibilities. My take was always, whatever happened, this was her rejecting him, not the other way round in the book, because he changed so dramatically from completely supporting her to completely supporting her rival. What's your take? I know we've got two canons now, and this is where we are, and this is canon in the show rather than canon in the book. But does this fit with what you were thinking in the book, or were you thinking something else in the book?
I thought there was a good chance of what you're describing, that he was always just very upright in terms of the laws of the land, and because he was lowborn, and even more so because he's Dornish in the show, that he had to be more behaved because he would be treated as an outsider. They didn't really lean into that. They made him Dornish and it hasn't really been a plot point. So that, that's not a bad thing, but the expectation that we got from that was not what they were actually going with. And we also had the prior era to think about. The commander that he replaced is, well, the Kingsguard knight he replaced, who was Lord Commander, was Ryan Redwine, who was famous for being particularly upright and noble, and like the Barristan the Bold of his time, and had sent a Kingsguard knight who had 3 wives and 16 children, Lucamore the Lusty, of House Strong, by the way. That's an interesting little twist, that he was sent to the wall for that. So that's probably why Kristen was mentioning gelding as a thing that could happen to him there, because that had just happened to someone 10, 20 years before. We're not entirely sure on the timeline of that, but it was while Sir Ryan was Lord Commander. So there was a lot of evidence or a lot of circumstantial evidence that Kristen Cole would be of that, cut from that cloth. But that was pure guesswork. Ultimately, a man's personality, a man or woman's, a human's personality outweighs all other factors that could be weighing on them. Whatever environmental factors we think might be there, you can be more stubborn than that. Your personality can always overcome what the scenario would seem to dictate. So that might be, I certainly was open to the idea that they had an affair. But in the book, as you say, their ages are different. They're much closer in age here. So that, in retrospect, that was a clue that they were going to have a consensual relationship first before breaking apart, because that making them closer in age just fosters that a little more. Book Kristen Cole was around Rhaenyra since she was 7 or 8 years old, which really more implied from our book reader perspective that he did see her as more of a daughter and would be creeped out by the idea of hooking up with her when she came of age, because he had taken care of her as a child. And so he wouldn't look at her that way. He would have looked at her as like a little sister or something. Yeah, he wouldn't want to look at her as a sexual being. So that, but of course, the changes they've made here, like a lot of TV shows, when they do an adaptation, they tend to lean, whatever the more sensational option is, they want to lean into that because it's TV. That's just the way they do it, which is not a complaint, but it is predictable in some ways. In other words, we could say, hey, the show is going to be more like Mushrooms. The show is always we could have always guessed that the show would hew more to Mushrooms version, the more sensational, the more outlandish, the more dramatic. Yeah, I mean, why not go with that, unless it's just completely crazy?
Well, yeah, I mean, Mushroom's version of some of the events leading up to this were even more outlandish than what we've got on the screen, it has to be said. So
yeah, you're right.
In particular with the Damon and Rhaenyra thing, that was what we saw on screen was really quite tame compared to what Mushroom was suggesting was going on.
Good point. You're right. Mushroom-ish, we'll say. You're right. The actual mushroom stuff is even more
mushroom adjacent.
They were able to tone it down and keep the spirit of Mushroom, without the full-blown Inquirer, Weekly World News kind of version.
But I did like what you're saying there about him having these qualms, and I think that did really come out, because the idea, in my head, having read the book, it was something like him going, okay, we can only do this if we go off and get married. And she said no. That was sort of roughly how I was imagining it to be. He was saying we have to do the whole thing, and this was sort of where we ended up on the show, was him saying, well, we need to go away, otherwise I'm going to be racked with guilt, and I can't live with that, and are you really wanting me to? So they sort of cut it down to the nuts and bolts of what I thought happened. So I was quite pleased with that as a whole, but added an extra layer, as I say, with the idea that this was, with them being the same kind of age, it has a slightly different dynamic, because you think in his mind this could work, I guess. Why not? They can just run off. He's changed his life and station. He grew up being relatively lowborn, and he's then gone up to be a member of the King's Guard, so she could change her station as well. So it kind of makes sense. But
she's also more popular in the books. That's important. Like, she's a lot more friendly with the crowds, and she's smiling and waving. And the Realm's Delight angle is played up a lot more in the book, so it's even more of an ask for her to run away. When in this case, in the book, there's no hint of her not wanting to be queen. There's no, this is all too much for me. So yeah,
actually, and the Realm's Delight, that's interesting. You raise it, because it's something that I've been waiting. I think they mentioned it once, perhaps.
I think twice, but it's not much.
Yeah, but it's certainly not as much as it comes across in the books, that everybody loved her, and when she was young, and this came across when she was 9, when her dad remarried, and so she's there being a cupbearer, and this hint of, oh, that's so cute, isn't she so pretty, that kind of feel to it. Mm-hmm. But aging her up so she's the same age roughly as Alicent meant that it was a bit harder to come from that angle, so I think that's probably why they played it down. This may well have some kind of longer term knock-on effects to what happens with her later. Is this sort of turnabout in fortunes of whether the people love her or not? And that might therefore be affected. So we'll have to see where they go with that, because that was very much she went from being everybody loves this person to everybody hates this person.
Yeah, and then it started when she was like 6 or 7. They started loving her, which of course they didn't portray that in the show. She's a teenager, so yeah.
Let's go still on this Kristen Cole sort of theme. Jacob Wells saying, "G'day, Robert and Aziz. G'day." Mm-hmm. In episode 5, the showrunners took some creative control and showed us Kristen Cole attacking Jeffrey Lonmouth, confronting but awesome scene. How would you suggest his outburst was explained, especially with Lionel present? Do you think the Queen pushed a favourable narrative to help him? We'll come on to that bit in just a moment, but they didn't show us exactly what prompted this. I thought it was really quite good the way they did that, is that there were a lot of things that we didn't see exactly what happened with Damon and Rhaenyra. Everybody was moving around. There was lots of music. There was lots of noise, and then suddenly it was hard to even see what was going on. There was, eventually we realized it. What was your take on what the trigger was? Because yes, Kristen Cole was clearly getting annoyed by Joffrey Lonmouth, which, to be fair, there's a good reason for him. This guy suddenly coming up and just trying to be pally with him, and he'd been going through quite a lot. Kristen, he'd had quite a big day. But what do you think there was a trigger? Do you think there was a specific thing that caused that?
I've heard a few good ideas and have a couple of my own. I think the ones worth mentioning are that he saw Damon and Rhaenyra, and that made him realize that he was, she had used him for, and Damon was he got ideas about what that meant for what their relationship had been. And he was already in a bad state of mind, so he was going to assume the worst. And maybe Joffrey tried to stop him, to pull him back, and Kristen just took his frustration out on him. Another possibility, and one that could work alongside this, rather than as a different idea entirely, is that Kristen is homophobic. It's suggested in Fire and Blood, which is that he says that in the Green Council, when they have decided to crown Aegon, he says we can't, or before they're still arguing with Lyman Beesbury and maybe other people there, and he says we can't let these kids take the throne. We know we can't allow bastards to take the throne, and we know what their father was. The boys wouldn't be safe. So he makes a homophobic comment, or what could easily be interpreted as such. I'm not really sure how else to interpret it. So there is that angle. And let's not forget, when Prince Damon started pummeling the messenger in the Stepstones that brought the message from Viserys, it was Joffrey who pulled him off. He's already been shown to be someone willing to move into action when there's conflict and to maybe diffuse it. In this case, he may have accidentally inflamed it further because he had already upset Kristen and didn't realize he had upset Kristen before. But also, Kristen may have just snapped. He may have been sitting there seething and was feeling suicidal. And when Joffrey approached him, he thought the whole thing was a secret and he was already ashamed. So this random guy comes up to him and is like, "Hey, bro, I know your secret." And he's like, "What? Who else knows?" And he's really ashamed of it. So he might be thinking, as a Kingsguard knight who has already confessed to Alicent and expects to be killed, he may be like, "Okay, well, I'm going to die. They're going to kill me. I'm minutes away from execution here. Too many people know." So he doesn't fear any consequences. There's no beating someone to death is like, well, they're going to kill me anyway. And he's just super angry and despondent and all the and as the actor Fabian Frankel said in an interview, Kristen's a bit of a thug. So
yes, yeah, he is. He absolutely is. And I mean, I absolutely agree with all of that. And I think you've completely, for me, hit the nail on the head there. I hadn't picked up on the Joffrey being the person who got involved on the Stepstones. That was a really good spot. But the Rhaenyra Damon thing, I think that if in his state of mind, if Kristen Cole had seen the person that he had thought was the love of his life, then he suggested basically, let's get married, let's run off, let's do all of this stuff, and she'd turned him down. And then he thinks it's for the realm, and then he looks around and sees actually maybe they were even kissing, Damon and Rhaenyra. We couldn't quite see that because the way it was cut, but certainly there was an intimacy going on there. That could well be a thing which could make him, because he will have been looking at her, and that's what he will have been paying attention to. So yeah, that's, in my mind, that's the thing that actually made him flip. But let's get on to this question. A few people have asked it in slightly different ways. 26 Arts Girl says, why was Kristen Cole not arrested after the murder? Luna Cascade says, what is or was Lionel's relationship with Kristen Cole? Did he pursue any actions against him for murdering Joffrey or for other later grievances? Now, I should say we've got a video coming out on this quite soon. I have a long and proud tradition of spoiling the next video that I've got coming out for my channel, so I'm very happy to go ahead with this. I'm hoping for that to come out on maybe Wednesday. So if you want the longer, sort of more considered view, then please do check it out. Then this isn't one of a whole series of collaborations that we've been doing. So if I sort of kick this off, and Aziz, if you want to sort of pick up the bits that you think are sort of worth noting, because there are 3 things that potentially he could have been got for. The first was sleeping with Rhaenyra, but as far as we're aware, nobody actually witnessed that. Yes, he's confessed to Alicent, but she seems not to be wanting to sort of like get him into trouble. Then there was the killing Joffrey Lonmouth, and then there was the hitting out at Lionel himself. And I think for me, what this boils down to on those last 2 things was that he's kind of, or we interpret this as being what's the rule of law here? What should, if the police came in and investigated this, went to a court, what would people? That's not what the situation is in Westeros here. The situation here is there's a king who has absolute power, and so actually the only person whose opinion really matters here is Viserys. And if Viserys says that's fine, then it's okay.
That's it. Yeah.
So did he do something which was actually so, was this against any of the big houses? Is that the Lonmouths are not one of the big houses. They're quite small.
No.
So that, maybe you could just throw a little bit of cash at the family or something. But ultimately, this is a matter of what Viserys is there. And do you want to sort of pick up on why Viserys might have decided not to press charges, as it were, not to actually do anything about this?
Yeah, there's a few reasons. I think mostly it comes down to what we alluded to before, that personality overrides everything, especially when it's the king, because the king has the power to override anything. As you said, he has absolute power effectively, especially in a situation like this. So Kristen, as a agent of the state, the equivalent in, say, the United States is the Secret Service, the modern Secret Service, where they're tasked with protecting the president, and they have a lot of leeway and are very not answerable to other bodies as to how they do it. And we've seen a few examples of where in the real world where that's caused some problems, where what they've done in their version of the line of duty is seen as maybe overstepping. And that could be an example that's applicable here. Kristen Cole is authorized by the state to deal violence out. If he thinks there's a threat to the king, he is allowed to act. Now, of course, he can't say that's what was going on with Joffrey Lonmouth. He can't say Joffrey Lonmouth was a threat to the king. I don't think that's on the table here as an option. But as we saw, no one knows how it started, the fight between him and Joffrey. We didn't see it. And in Westeros, there's a lot of leeway for insults, for violence. I mean, look at what happened with the Blackwood kid. He stabbed the Bracken kid after a duel because he called him coward. Calling someone a coward is grounds for violence in Westeros. You're like, that's like, oh, he called you a coward. Okay, then I can understand why you fought to the death. I mean, it sounds kind of wild to us, but it's borne out a number of times. Another example is Robert Baratheon. He was notoriously lenient when it came to justice that he just didn't want to deal with. Look at the example of Derry right at the beginning with the direwolves and biting Joffrey. He was like, I don't want to deal with this. That was basically his attitude. He's like, I want this to be over with. I want everybody to get along. My wife wants to kill a direwolf. I don't care that that's unfair. Just do it, whatever you want. And it's a similar thing here with Alicent has just taken Kristen Cole on as her protector. She needs allies. She's just been convinced by her father that her children are in danger. So he's now gone. So she finds herself without allies and feeling that her children are in danger. So she needs someone. Kristen Cole is a perfect person to recruit when you have those particular needs. Someone who will defend your kids, and now someone who's going to be very loyal to her because she's saved him 3 times. Once from himself, he was going to commit suicide. Once by effectively pardoning him for his admissions about Rhaenyra, and 3 for presumably for helping him skirt punishment from Joffrey Lonmouth, which he may not have even faced much punishment for that. As you said, Sir Laenor is the wild card here. Wouldn't he, as a very powerful man, push for punishment? Well, the problem there is it breeds questions. Do they really want people to know why he cares so much about Lonmouth? Does he really want his relationship with Joffrey Lonmouth to be public? I don't think they do. I don't think his father or mother want that either. So I think they'd be like, they go the route you suggested. They pay the Lonmouth family off and say, look, we're sorry that there's no justice, but you're still going to get something out of this. And that may not be good for their honor, but what are they going to do about it? Like you said, they're the Lonmouths. So how does Kristen Cole? He has a small family too. His house is even less powerful than the Lonmouths. So, but if Queen Alicent's on his side, that's the same as having the Hightowers on your side. She's the queen. She has Viserys's ear. She's like Cersei to Robert. Use Jaime as an example. Jaime killed a king. That should be the worst thing a Kingsguard can do. But he got away with it in part because he's a Lannister. But he could have gotten away with it even if he wasn't a Lannister, if Cersei, the queen, championed his cause. She did so because she's in love with him and he's her brother. But you don't have to have the brother part for the Lannister protection, the protection of the queen to apply in a case of justice where, like you said, that's what it all comes down to. So
absolutely. And it's, we've got a conflict avoiding king, I think, is another really important point here.
Yeah.
Alicent clearly has decided, I'm going to try and recruit him, Kristen Cole, onto my team. She can put some pressure onto the king. The people who might try and make this an issue, Lionel, you've already said he probably doesn't want to get lots of questions being raised. Also, when we're talking about characters with hints of homophobia to them, Corlys Velaryon, actually, earlier in that episode, he seemed a little bit. I mean, Rhaenys, the mother, seemed all very cool, but he was like, well, yeah. There was a sort of a hint to what he was saying, which wasn't. Yeah, I'd much rather my son was like actually going to be like having children with this woman, kind of thing. So that's that. I don't think he would have been pushing for this, which means that actually there's nobody there who would have been trying to get justice. So the moment we get rid of this idea of that there is a criminal justice system which will see the right result, and I think actually there's just a king and who's trying to influence the king, that's the point at which I think we get to the truth on this. Some really interesting points in the chat as well related to this. A couple of people pointing out that actually Kolnitsky saying, I don't get why Aziz has got less than 50,000 subscribers. This is a really good point, everyone. There is a link down to History of Westeros in the description. There is absolutely, I think you're on something like 47,
48. Yeah.
We've
always had a little more success on the podcast side, but we would love to do better on the video side. Come on over, folks.
Yes, and do absolutely go off, do that. Give them a subscribe. Absolutely excellent channel. But a couple of people pointing out that although we've not got a specific question on it, obviously we remember the Harwin Strong going in and rescuing Rhaenyra. Damon was next to her when all this was kicking off. What happened to Damon? It's a really interesting question. Does this tell us that he was actually he backed off? If this scene is as we think it is, that suddenly Kristen Cole sees the two of them getting a bit close, starts charging at them, Joffrey gets in the way. Does Damon really run away at that point? Is that right? I don't know, but he definitely wasn't. Yeah. He wasn't there, was he? I'm
confused by that too. He has a knack for leaving, though. He's shown that he's good at just vanishing. Maybe not. This was the most vanishing of all his vanishings. The others were just he walked away. This one we don't see. So yeah, it is a little odd. Did he get jostled away and then found himself disconnected from the crowd, from Rhaenyra because of that, or did she get pushed away from him because she's small and tiny and could easily be jostled? I don't have an answer other than he ran off with Lena because that's who he goes off and marries.
Exactly, yeah.
So where's my chance to run off with her?
and it may well be we don't, because obviously we've got a time jump. We'll talk about this in a moment. We've got a time jump here, so maybe we don't ever get an actual explanation for that, but we just see that he ends up with Lena. Derry's read it before. Interesting question saying, what reasons do you think Viserys had for having the wedding take place immediately after the carnage instead of later in the week as planned? And it was literally, the blood was still on the floor. Laenor was crying. I mean, it was just like this was clearly just minutes later. Do you think it was just, we're just going to get this done now? Let's just, and that was it? was it a purely pragmatic decision? This was always going to be a pragmatic marriage. We're just going to get it done, or was there another reason?
Yeah, I think that he was. I think there were at least 3 factors for Viserys speeding it up. One was the tragedy. You can't just have 6 days of celebration after the bridegroom's lover has been killed brutally in front of him. That's a lot to expect, just from a human perspective, of people to celebrate after that happened. Every time Viserys gets people together, it seems like violence breaks out too, which shows the simmering in the realm, and a lot of grievances are out there, or not just Viserys too. We got Brackens and Blackwoods going at it at Storm's End. So maybe he is wising up to the potential of more outbreaks of violence if they have more festivities, especially tournaments, which we saw the last time there's a tournament. It really devolved into brutal violence. So there's that, but also his own health. I mean, the man collapsed twice in that episode. His nose was bleeding. He got seasick. His health is in bad shape. He may have just been like, I can't take this. Let's just get this over with. The stress was getting to him, the anxiety, the staying on his feet and just not being able to rest the way he needed to. I think that's a big factor. And I think the third is what you alluded to, that the most important thing in light of those 2 things, the most important bottom line here is to complete the marriage, is to have this union, which A, is politically important, B, he's decided is important for his legacy. And his legacy is something that, in his mind, will matter for years, centuries, or more. Whereas whether or not they celebrated for 1 day or 7 probably won't be a big part of the history books, if at all. They will be, I think, actually, because this is a pretty scandalous, dramatic thing to have happen at a wedding. But it still is going to, if the second age of dragons were to work out, that will be much more important for his legacy than this brouhaha at the wedding.
Yeah, I mean, it had to happen, and if they left it, then maybe somebody would have second thoughts or something. I think he just wanted it.
You're right.
But also, I do wonder, it may not have been his decision, bizarrely, because if you think about that whole thing, where was he? I mean, he was selling at the top table. If you imagine, would Aegon the Conqueror have allowed that to happen without doing anything? No. I mean, would Robert Baratheon? No, he'd have waded in there. But Viserys just sits quietly. And actually, it's Lionel Strong who's the person who just nods to his son.
Go in, so great.
Go get the princess. And it's maybe and Lionel, who is just a quick hat tip to Lionel here. Through this, he's coming across as the sensible good guy, isn't he? I mean,
he really is. Yeah.
Very, very rarely says or does anything that's not just sensible. And so he very quietly just sends his son in, go and rescue the princess. And it may well have been him who says, we just need to get this done now, Your Majesty. So
one more thing, actually, when you add in there that we didn't mention, another factor for Viserys maybe just scuttling the celebrations was the return of Damon, who was this agent of chaos that he wasn't predicting to be there. And already he's grabbing his daughter, who he's like, that's who we got the perspective on before the fight broke out, was Viserys noticing what Damon was doing and becoming concerned. And he'd also stared at Damon long and hard after the accusation of murdering Rhea Royce. So he was like, and he just showed up uninvited. So I think maybe the presence of Damon was another reason to speed things up. He's like, well, what's Damon going to do in the tournament, or what's he going to do at the actual wedding? Because that wasn't even meant to be the wedding at that point. So fast forward past Damon.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. He's always the wild card. Callie Summers saying, too bad they're not Dothraki. It would have been a pretty decent wedding for them. I think they're still a couple of deaths short of being a decent Dothraki wedding, aren't they? Wasn't it with a wedding without at least 3 deaths is considered dull? I think that was what the line was.
Yep.
The Bryn's fat sister, one of the members club members here, saying, I agree with that. Aziz is an encyclopedia. Indeed he is. the General Grievous 19 saying, how does Viserys survive through the long time jump? Well, this is an excellent point. And let's talk about this time jump now, because what we've got...
Yeah.
We've had 5 episodes, and now we're moving on from episode 6. Is I think it's going to be something like a 10-year time jump. So this is a significant time jump. So we're having the actors playing the 2 lead female roles, being Alicent and Rhaenyra. They are shifting up to older actors. Obviously, all of the sort of the children are going to be moving up to being older as well, and I think even Lena and Laenor are as well. So a lot of the supporting cast are going to be moving to be older actors. The main people like Damon and Viserys, they're staying the same, but a lot of the supporting cast are moving up. So I've got a question here. Well, actually, before we do that, actually, it's just worth pausing just to say the first half of the season, particularly the actresses who played Alicent and Rhaenyra, I think did an amazing job. It was absolutely fantastic. Knowing that they only had those 5 episodes, but still, we have now bought into those characters so much. So kudos to them. I think they're probably both going to go on to some pretty amazing things.
Agree.
But let's talk about the time jump. Emma Shyman saying, Merry Autumn to you. Merry Autumn to you too. What will the time jumps be like for the rest of the season? The big one is before this episode, but how many do we have left? We're still about 10 years from the dance. Will there be small jumps between each episode? Or will there be another big jump? Do you have any inside knowledge on this, Aziz? Do you happen to know what, just in terms of where the time jumps are? Because yes, we're still not at the time of the dance now.
I have some strong guesses, and I think we can be confident in them because of what we know vaguely about the other episodes. And I haven't seen any leaks or watched anything ahead, so I'm just working with what's out there in terms of trailers and what we know about Fire and Blood. Episodes 9 and 10 should be when things really come to a head. I predict if Viserys dies in episode 9, it's called the Green Council, so that fits with that. So episode 10 will not be a big time jump. They're going to be dealing with Rhaenyra's side of things. Maybe she has her last child, or her Visenya there. But that means episodes from 6 to 7, and from 7 to 8, and from 8 to 9 should have some fairly substantial time jumps. And I don't think there'll be a 10-year time jump. But let's keep this in mind. Even after we are introduced to a whole bunch of kids this episode, we're going to meet Baela, Rhaena. We're going to see a new actor for Aegon. He's going to be aged up to a young teenager, or 12 maybe. Aemond, we'll see Aemond and Helena, whereas we haven't seen Aemond at all yet, and we've only seen baby Helena. Keep in mind that Aegon and Helena are going to have kids of their own, and we're going to meet them. And Rhaenyra is going to have Joffrey in this episode. Luke and Jace will already been born, but she has to have Aegon and Viserys, future Viserys II, with Damon. That's still, and they have to age up a little bit. So there is still plenty of time left this season. I think it's ironic that they've had to move things together to fit things within one episode, to not do time jumps within a single episode. So that's in some cases they move an event that's 4 years in the future to match up with an event that's happening concurrently. But in this case of episode 6, it's effectively the year of the Red Spring, which in canon, there's so much that happens there. They actually have to split it up. Whereas it's kind of funny that they're spreading everything out so much, but here they're pushing everything together for most of the season. But this one episode is the one time they're going to have to spread it apart because there's too much. So I expect the time jump that we had between episode, I think 2 and 3, where it was 3 years, where they go to the hunt and then there's the stepstones at the end, the resolution of that, where it's implied that it's been about 3 years. I think we're going to see a couple of those. We're going to see significant jumps forward in time. We're going to get another version of a lot of the actors. We're going to get another version of none of the adults will be changed out from here on. But there will be, the child actors will continue to be swapped out multiple times. Like Baela and Rhaena will age up again, and Aemond will age up again. And we're just going to get It's a cacophony of children, I tell you. They're running a nursery up
Mm.
there in the Red Keep. So yeah, there's no way around that. Plus the dragons have to hatch. We're going to see some new dragons, and they'll be aged up along with their actors. So yeah, we still have a lot of timeline to cover. You're right.
We do a lot of events are going to happen, and I think if anything, this is going to start to feel like for the first half of the show, first half of the season, they've kept quite a steady pace. It's not. I don't think anyone's thought of it as being slow, but it's not been charging forward. I think the second half of the season, things are going to feel like they're moving a lot more quickly. We're going to have not just one big moment at the end of an episode. We're going to have 2 or 3 big moments at the end of episodes that we just have to digest what's happening in different places and to different characters. So yeah, I think I would agree. I think the last 2 episodes, almost certainly that's at the time of the outbreak in the period just leading up to it. Maybe even some of episode 8. If the Green Council is episode 9, then does that mean Viserys dies at the end of episode 8, or is it at the beginning of episode 9? I don't know. I've got no inside information on that. But
yeah,
so I think what we will find is between 6 and 7, 7 and 8, 8 and 9. At least 2 of those will have a medium-sized time jump. Nothing's huge, but just like 3 or 4 years. That's how I would take that. Let's go. Actually, I've not really looked in the chat, but while we're roughly halfway through the stream, what I always try and do is to say, moderators, thank you very much. If you are watching this and watching it live, if you're in the chat, please show a little bit of love to the moderators. They do an amazing job making everybody feel at home, happy, safe, as well as free from any spoilers and free from the spam bots happen every now and then. They do an absolutely amazing job. So moderators, thank you. And if you are there in the chat, please do show them a little bit of love as well. And also patrons, thank you very much. I cannot do what I do without your support. So thank you for that. That's why I do try and frame these live streams around questions from my patrons. So those couple of bits of thanks out of the way. A reminder that this is a charity live stream. There have been a couple of very generous donations I've noticed actually in the stream. So thank you very much. It flashes through very quickly, so I didn't quite catch the names, but I think we're now up to 3,900. Let's see whether we can hit the 4,000.
Yeah, let's get to 4. Great milestone
before the end of the stream. That would be absolutely fantastic. It is a really worthwhile cause. This is what I'm saying. If you wish to show your appreciation, this is the way I'd love you to do it. So please do prioritize that if you have the means and resources to do so. But let's go to the questions again, unless there was something in the chat you spotted while I was talking.
Right now, it's all mod love, so that's going good.
Excellent. Well done, moderators. This is good. Well, let's go to a question from one of my patrons. This is 444, saying, "Hi, Robert. Congratulations on passing 444,000 subscribers."
Nice. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. I think I'm on 446 now. So it's going well. What do you think is the role of showing so many rodents in the Red Keep? Are they simply to show that there is something rotten here? Are they spies, skin changed by some with the blood of the first men, or maybe to introduce the need to hire a rat catcher, someone like Cheese? This is an interesting one. I mean, I think there's definitely this is the thing. The fact that there were mice and rats and rodents in the Red Keep. This was noted by George R. R. Martin in Fire and Blood. It's also had mentions in A Song of Ice and Fire as well. There's a rat problem, and this does come important later because there is a rat catcher who Cheese, who has an important role later. If you've read the book, you know quite what that is and how important that is. So this is definitely, there is a nod here to that, I think. Is there anything else going on though? Do you think is this an artistic thing that they're trying to show that there's rotten things happening and people are just ignoring it?
Yeah, I think that is it. I think you're right to foreshadow the Blood and Cheese plot. which may have been also shown more directly by the rat drinking blood there during the wedding. And there was also the rat on Alicent's bedpost. So yeah, I think it's that, but also there is the idea that rats are usually the ones who feast on the dying. They're there to show that this regime is eating itself. It's dying, and the rats have come to feast on that corpse, so to speak, the corpse of the House of the Dragon. Because we know that so many awful things are coming, so many tragedies and so many losses, and the power of House Targaryen will never be what it was, and it will be a very much a self-inflicted wound. So yeah, it is a metaphor for not taking care of things. If you don't clean up your business, you don't take care of your household, you will get rats. And it is also fits really well as foreshadowing, and it fits into the history of the Red Keep so nicely. We know very famously Arya chases a cat down under into the secret tunnels and sees Illyrio and Varys, and that kicks off all sorts of fun stuff and also speaks to her skin changing potential later. But that's obviously been a change. There are cats there, and the rat catchers were all fired and replaced with cats. It's one of the few things we can say we really like about Otto. Is Otto, apparently, at least in Fire and Blood canon, is the one who brought all the cats in. So then the cats have ruled the Red Keep ever since. So as a cat person, well, I got to give Otto credit for that, even though I maybe don't give him credit for much else. So that policy of cats instead of rat catchers, it was probably smart given what those secret tunnels can be used for. But also, it's good to have cats. It's 270 years of cats in the Red Keep, started by Otto. So
well, Otto is, and they haven't really emphasized this on the show, but in the books, it's, I think, reasonably clear. For all his faults, and yes, there are many faults, he is clearly a competent administrator at the very least. He is good at running the realm. This seems to be why he stayed on for so long as Hand of the King. He was just generally competent. So it is a sensible decision. Just as a complete aside, this is, if fans of British politics, I'm not heading into politics here, do not worry, but we'll be very aware of Larry the cat, who is the Downing Street cat. And this is actually genuinely true. There is an official position called Chief Mouser to the Cabinet Office.
No kidding.
Which you can have a look on Wikipedia, and you'll find that this is sort of the cat for 10 Downing Street is a position which has been held for literally hundreds of years, I think, and with these named cats there, and it's a proud and noble thing. And if you ever get bored, then you can Larry the cat has got an interesting Twitter account as well, cause of
Today
much
I learned
being let into and out of 10 Downing Street. But one of the things that 444 suggested was perhaps that this might be somebody sort of skin changing into these rats. There's a hint. I mentioned this a bit earlier in the stream, and I would love your take on this, because the other question 444 asked is someone looking through the Weirwood face in the Red Keep? If so, who? This is something which a lot of people have noticed. We've got the heart tree there. We've got the Weirwood tree, which we weren't expecting, to be honest. I don't think anyone was really thinking, because when we had Game of Thrones, they didn't have a Weirwood tree there. Certainly in A Song of Ice and Fire, it's very clear that there is not a Weirwood tree at that point in the history of the Red Keep. And yet here it's in every episode, this tree, and it's not just in the background somewhere. People are leaning against it. When you get Larys and Alicent talking, it's right there. They're standing on either side, and the face is right between them. As a visual, it's very, very strong. Now, Matt, Joe Magician, who has been on, I'll try and get him back on again to talk about this, because he's done a number of videos and some epic Twitter threads about this,
Yes,
and the
has.
possibility that someone like, say, Larys may be a Greenseer, which this is how he gets his information. I'm not going to go into all of his sort of logic behind that. There is logic behind that. What's your take? Why do we have this Weirwood tree so obviously there on the show? Is it trying to link into sort of the wider Weirwood plot that we know is going on in the background, but doesn't play a part in this? What do you think is going on?
Yeah, I think so. I think it fuels that. I think the showrunners, with the referring back to our comments and conversation about how much care they're taking and how well they understand the details, I think they understood that putting a weirwood in any scene will at least get people to wonder if someone else is listening, or to think about the presence of old gods, skin changers, and all that. And as we just alluded to with the rats, with Arya's plot line there, and she can skin change and see through the cats that are there now. Why not rats? Why not have that possibility from a house that's been in the Riverlands for eons? And the Riverlands is the second most old gods-ish behind the North, right? And we already have Alice Rivers is going to come along and do some supernatural things, and she's supposedly a bastard of House Strong. So if she can do magic, then why not her cousin, Larys Strong, or someone else in that family, or just someone else entirely? So I think they want to suggest it. I'm not sure that we're likely to delve deep into it, but we may get more hints, more clues, more fuel for that fire, more things to consider. But I also think we're going to see that tree get cut down at some point during the run of this show. Maybe not soon, because it's not there in the Red Keep in Joffrey's time, and there is a stump. So
yeah,
we might see the cutting of that weirwood down, which it might be because of just a kid being petty, like a young king being like, I'm angry and I'm going to do this to lash out. Or it may be because they really think there's some sort of eyes on them. Maybe they get this idea that, better safe than sorry, cut this thing down. That maybe they're watching us. A lot of possibilities there, but I think we'll see that tree get cut down, and that's going to be sad.
It will be. I mean, I've always assumed that it must have gone, say, in one of the later reigns, but because I couldn't see an obvious point in the dance when the people would care about Weirwood Tree, but I mean, I don't know. It's a really odd one. The fact that it is there is so that it has to have some purpose. That purpose could just be to be reminding us of the wider world of what's going on in Westeros, and we will get at least one other Weirwood Tree referenced again. I think we will get Damon and Aemon just before they had their big fight. Then a Weirwood Tree is definitely, that was a key part of the sort of the build up to that. We will get a visit to Winterfell, so we may well see the Weirwood Tree there. We might even get a visit to the Isle of Faces, who knows? So there will be links into the Weirwood network. What I do not know is the extent to which they wish to hint at there being something beyond this, that there is actually not just a tree present there, but somebody's watching, somebody's paying attention, because so many of those secret conversations were in front of the Weirwood Tree. The Weirwood network know what's going on. Are they then going to try and influence it?
Yeah, and the North is going to mostly take, or entirely take, Rhaenyra's side, so that may be a reason for, say, Aegon II to cut down the tree just because he's mad at the North or something. Something petty like that.
Yeah, so when I was talking about Joe Magician, his theory, or a theory that he has, is that maybe Larys Strong, as I said, is a Greenseer. How strong we don't know, although they are important. The implication is that they might be a First Men family, but we don't know huge amounts about all of their background and history. They sort of like appear and then disappear again before we get to the time of A Song of Ice and Fire. So is there a possibility that Larys could be a Greenseer? Well, yes. Does it fit in with this idea of him being someone who collects a lot of information? It definitely does. It would make you a very good Master of Whisperers if you could see through that Weirwood tree and actually listen in on all of those secret conversations. So maybe this is something that they're hinting at. But what's your take on Larys? Luna Cascade asking what his end game is. How does he respond to his brother's relationship with Rhaenyra and his nephew? What are his motivations overall? Larys is one of those characters in the book that we're invited to speculate about whose side he's really on. I have my suspicions, but I would love to hear what you think. Who do you think he's batting for? He's starting out here trying to gain the trust of Alicent at the very least, if not being on Team Green. But what's your take?
Yeah, I think he thinks the Greens I think he's taking the side of who he thinks is going to win, which is at odds with what the rest of his family thinks. And I think maybe because of the situation with Rhaenyra's children is all the more reason for him to see the Greens as the eventual winners. And of course, that's his call, but he also stands to gain by going against his family, becoming Lord of Harrenhal. So there's a lot of potential gain for him by siding with the Greens. And if he just has looked at the scenario and believes he can ascertain who's going to win, well, we've seen a lot of lords and knights and power players choose what side they're going to join based on who they think is going to win. Purely that calculus. It's, well, I want to be on the winning side. And if he looks at it that coldly, that pragmatically, and says, well, I don't care that my family is supporting one side or is compromised by their association with one side, he still sees the Greens as the eventual winners. And that's who he wants to get in good with. And so we see that very early on. Like you said, he takes Alicent's side. He thinks that the realm, maybe he's like Otto in that he sees the realm as unwilling to accept a queen, and thus they'll rise for the king. And so he's getting ahead of that. He's like, well, I'm expecting the realm to rise for Aegon. I want to be on Team Aegon. He thinks that side's going to win. So I think it's not hard to see. There's obviously could be more to it. But I think that's pretty straightforward. I think it fits. Just he thinks his dad's on the wrong side, his brother's on the wrong side, and he's not super loyal to them. Maybe he likes them, but he likes living and having power more than that. As to the idea that he's supernatural, yeah, it's absolutely possible. And we got to keep in mind there's a wide range of possibilities here. Is he someone as powerful as Bloodraven, who also is a Master of Whisperers that had access to old gods' powers from a house nearby, the Blackwoods, right? But there's also milder forms of it, like just green dreams, like Jojen has, where he maybe just has some flashes of the future, and that suggests to him what he should do. But prophecy being the nature it is, having the nature that it has, maybe he's misinterpreted his dreams. Maybe he has green dreams, so he should take the green side because they're green dreams. No, no, but there's a lot of thing. I do love the idea that either he's able to spy on people because he has a little bit of that power, if not a lot, and if not that, maybe he just has some dreams. Maybe he just has the occasional green dream that tells him things, and he's misinterpreted that to think that the Greens are going to win. Maybe he sees Aegon taking the throne and hasn't seen beyond that and doesn't realize that, hey, maybe that's not the end. Lots of people take the throne and then lose it, so this is what we talked about before. Just giving the hint of this opens up a huge amount of discussion and fun for us fans. And I think that's part of what we are really enjoying about the way this show is being treated, is they're giving us these little nuggets that we're able to extrapolate so much with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the the way I've always interpreted Laris is in the light of the two other members of his family that we know about. It's a small family. His father becomes, in the book, Hand of the King for a long time. We're going to miss a lot of it with a time jump, but for a long time, he is the most powerful man in the land, other than the king himself. His brother is heading off and effectively being the father of potentially the next rulers of the entire Seven Kingdoms. And who is he? He's just like this person everyone ignores. And I do wonder whether it's a matter of, actually, I'm important, but I'm going to do it in my way. I'm going to be powerful in my way, and I'm going to pick the winners, and I'm going to help them. And that seems to be where he's going here, is that it's very much I'm going to make Alicent trust me by giving her this information. That's where he seems to be going. In the book, towards the end, I kind of feel he ends up that there's a kind of triumvirate of characters, of which he's one who they almost seem to go, you know what, we need to end this war now, because Dragon Stark's coming down. He's just going to carry on. We need to stop this thing. Him and Corlys and Tyrion Lannister, and it's just like they just say, no, we're going to end this. And it's almost as if they form their own team anti-war. And I think that we will come to support that. If that happens in the same on the show, I think we will come to support them, because we see quite how horrific this war is, and the idea that this could carry on should be horrific to us. A couple of interesting points in the chat. Mark O'Brien saying Larys is batting for the end of the Targaryens, which be interesting, because if we're talking about this is where the High Towers and that conspiracy is coming from, then if he's supporting them, perhaps that's where he's going as well. Interesting. Joseph Anderson saying agreed, because how else would he know about the moon tea? Has to be a rat. That's an interesting point. How did he know about it? I mean, if he understands and knows all the secret passages, maybe he saw that. Koboros82 saying Bloodraven is looking to the past from the future through the tree. I mean, I'm always in favor of blaming Bloodraven, so I think that's almost certainly true that he could see that if he wishes to.
It's also worth mentioning about the rats. I've seen people reminding us that the rats are sometimes used as a reference to the maesters, and if we're thinking about the possibility that the maesters are part of the reason why there aren't as many dragons around anymore, that really fits with the metaphor of the rats feasting on the corpse of the House of the Dragon. So I thought we'd throw that out there.
Yeah, that was a really interesting point. Derry's read it before, saying there's a callous selfishness to Team Anti-War, though. They've all wrung what they can from the conflict before taking their stand for peace. I think it depends on how they play it. I think they could make them look, or we could make them look, or they could make them look, as you say, people who've got what they can from it. But I got the feeling that they were all willing to accept their fate and willing to put their lives on the line in order to end the war. So I'm team anti-war, if that makes sense. Before we leave Larys, though, Jacob Wells saying, do you think that Larys and Harwin could be in cahoots? They are brothers, but they seem to be going down opposite paths regarding their support of Rhaenyra. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of get the feeling, certainly on the show, they're going in different directions. And in the book, then they're in different places, because Harwin is off with Rhaenyra, and to a degree that team heads off over to Dragonstone. But what will be interesting when we get there is the burning spoilers, I should probably say. What I always say at the beginning of that, I forgot to say at the beginning of this stream, as far as I'm concerned, book spoilers are absolutely fine, because the book's been out for a while. Show spoilers, no. So I will happily talk about what happens in the book. They are keeping close to the book, but there are changes, so I don't count them as being show spoilers. But anyway, so in the book, Harrenhal gets burned down, and both Lionel and Harwin get caught up in it. Now, it will be really interesting to see where this goes. I've always thought that the most suspect person there is Damon, simply because if he wanted to marry Rhaenyra, he had to get 3 people out of the way, and all 3 of them died in very quick succession, and that just seemed far too coincidental for me. But one of the names which is thrown up in Fire and Blood is Larys. Might he have done it in order to become the new Lord of Harrenhal? Was he, this conniving, ambitious person? It would be fascinating to see where they go with this on the show, because that will tell us a lot about his character. If he's involved or not involved, I think will show us a lot about not just what his relationship is with the rest of his family, as in, does he want to kill them, but also where he's coming from.
Yep, I agree with that.
Let's go to question from Mara Lee. Hi there, Mara. Saying,
Hey, Mara.
in one of the teaser trailers, we see Alicent trying to go after Rhaenyra in what looks like the cat's paw dagger. What do you think provoked her to do so? Why did the showrunners decide to show us this scene? Is it so we can see more examples of hatred and animosity between the 2 women? Well, I think that scene is not going to be in this episode coming up. That's my personal instinct. I think that's probably a follow-up to the incident. We have a Strong Boys incident when Aemon goes in and claims a dragon, and the Strong Boys do not wish him to, and that's where Aemon gets his eye patch. And we get Alicent demands an eye for an eye, and I think that what I think will be interesting is that when we first saw that, because that shot, or that very small snippet of Alicent running in with the dagger, that was around quite a while before the show. That was one of the first bits from one of the teaser trailers that we got, and everyone was like, "Ooh, look, the cat's paw dagger!" But that's now got an extra level to it.
Oh yeah,
because that is suddenly, this is where the prophecy is written, the prophecy of the prince that was promised. Do you think, Aziz, I'd love, and we obviously don't know this, but do you think that there's any more to it than Alicent just picked up the closest dagger and ran? Or do you think she knows something about that? Is there some meaning to that?
I think it was it was part of the writing choice. They wanted to show that dagger prominently and make it into the trailer. But also, yeah, I mean, Viserys has that dagger on him at all times, we've seen throughout the season. But in Fire and Blood, there's even a reference to Alicent much later in life. It was said that she was prone to snatch a dagger from a guard and just go after people in anger. So they had to keep her under watch at all times, because this is, what she became later in life after so much loss and tragedy. So that's another example of the showrunners paying attention to like little clues to what type of person she is, and so they can use that example. Like, well, she snatched a dagger and apparently several times, so why not insert it into this moment where she's really upset over what's happened to her child. By the way, Robert, you're sitting in front of a graphic of the next episode, which has the characters there. The cat's paw dagger is the pupil of the eyeball there. This eye slit is shaped like the cat's paw dagger. Yeah. How about that?
Wow, that's clever. I like that. Okay, all right. I had not noticed that before.
Perfect framing for this question. Yeah, so I think that's a way to show really highlight the way their relationship is come to a head, and the way that their respective families are really what they're both. What's come between their prior relationship, even though they had little choice in how things worked out to that point. They are very much in charge to this point going forward. They're a lot less agency moving forward in the past, and now they have a lot of agency, though still not entirely.
You're getting some love in the chat there, Aziz, for that spot.
Oh, thanks.
Awesome spotting, Aziz. Good catch. Mind blown, says Philip. Excellent. So eagle-eyed Aziz. So yeah, lots of love for that. Yeah, I hadn't spotted that at all. Let's shift to a slightly different question. This is 26 Art Girl saying, what do you think of History of Westeros's comparison of Damon to Achilles? Now, I can tell you at this moment in time, I do not think anything because I've not seen. This is a video you released a day or two ago. Maybe?
Yeah, only
I've
like
not had a
48
chance
hours
to
ago.
see it. I would very happily sit back and let you give me the 2-minute version of that. What is this?
Okay, so there's we have long been tweeting about the concept of parallel lives. Usually it's within the framework of A Song of Ice and Fire, but we decided to start making videos on it. And to start off, since it came from a Greek author named Plutarch, these concept where he wrote a bunch of books on famous Greeks compared to famous Romans, like Julius Caesar to Alexander the Great, for example. And we like that idea. It's a fun concept, a fun format. And we thought we'd start with Achilles and Damon, even though Achilles has nothing to do with The Song of Ice and Fire. Because, for one, I noticed when watching the Stepstones battle that there was just a lot of vibes from the movie Troy and just about the general Achilles legend and things that are similar. For example, no one could stop him except for arrows. They have a horse head helmet. They have long blonde hair, which is true to Greek myth. Even Achilles had blonde or light colored hair, and that was very unusual for Greeks. And they both have they're very petty. They're both very proud and sat out and sulked when things were important, even at the cost of harming their allies. And the trigger for that was having something taken away from them. Dragonstone, Briseis in Achilles' case. They both have Damon is actually a Greek word. So that's kind of surprising to a lot of people. So there's that. So I'm sure I'm forgetting a few other comparisons, but there's more than that. It's about a 10-minute video, and there's a lot of fun little nuggets here and there that draw them together. Achilles is the sort of the template for the peerless warrior. So it's hard to not at least have something in common with him if you're writing a great warrior. But another fun one is that he was said to have wings on his feet, which Damon seemed awfully fast running down the beach there, but his dragon actually does have wings on his feet. So I thought that was neat as well. And yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so I mean, the obvious question, because I'm loving this so far. The obvious question is, what does that make Damon's Achilles heel?
Good
because
question.
Clearly the legend at a very high level is that Achilles gets his invulnerability by being sort of dipped into the invulnerability water, but the thing with the being held by his heel, so the only part of him which was not invulnerable was his heel, which is where we get the phrase an Achilles heel.
Yeah.
But what it does make me wonder whether it's his family. Certainly the way they put it on the show is that Viserys and Rhaenyra is his Achilles heel.
Yeah, I think it could be because that is where his weakness is. You might argue he has his Achilles heel is his erectile dysfunction, but I don't suppose that's going to get him killed. So it's an interesting weakness he has. But it's funny, real quick to mention as well. You mentioned the River Styx where he was dipped to get his invulnerability. There's two versions of that myth as well. One of which says he was burned on a brazier for his invulnerability, which sounds very Targaryen, being burned, for that. And of course, Achilles got his armor from the god of volcanoes, which is all Targaryens come from volcanoes in a sense. But yeah, I think maybe it's his personality, though, his pride. I think that's what we've seen. People have been able to manipulate Damon based on challenging him, calling him a coward, or telling him he can't do something, or just tweaking his pride. That might be his metaphorical weakness rather than having a particular physical weakness or inability in some way. I think it's more about personality, because that's also what I personally think. It's their personalities they have more in common there than just they're being badass, unstoppable warriors. Because there's lots of examples of that in the world or in fiction and myth here and there. So yeah, I tend to think of it as his extreme passions, his inability to plan, his fly by the seat of his pants, kind of literally, I guess, fly by the seat of his pants as a dragon rider. His mercurial nature. Yeah, I think that might be, maybe I'm not pinning down exactly into one word what it is, but yeah, maybe pride, maybe arrogance. I don't know. Things that Achilles had too, though.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Just picking up a couple of bits from the chat. Agreed Weirwood saying Baelor the Blessed a while ago. Yes, that's who I think we'll have to wait and see what happens on the show, but that's my guess. That's the king who chopped down the Weirwood tree in the Red Keep. He was the Targaryen who was most faith of the 70 to an extreme level. And so you can easily imagine that he would, if it was still there at that point, he would not have allowed it to stay there. That I think that's pretty clear. And somebody else, it might have been agreed again, said Aemon Targaryen is being played by David Tennant's son, which was something I didn't know. But that's I will have to have another look now. But
that's right. But he's adopted, so it's funny. He does look like him, but he's adopted. So it's really wild. Yeah, it's quite something. Yeah, Ty Tennant is his name. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I'm trying not to go for a sort of an Adam Valarion kind of thought process. That wouldn't dare impugn David Tennant in any way. Hat tip to you, sir. Let's go to a question from Mara Lee saying, "Why do you think the showrunners decided to use the title tune from Game of Thrones for the title tune of House of the Dragon?" Yeah, I'll admit I was kind of hoping for a new one, a new theme. I don't mind it because obviously it's a great tune. And I can only assume this is an attempt to show that they're the same. They're in the same world. That was one of the things when you were interviewing Ryan Condal, which he came out with a lot more clearly than I had expected, was saying not just he's trying to keep this. Yeah, we've got two canons now. We've got show canon and book canon. He's not just trying to keep it close to the book canon, but he wanted to make sure that it matched up to the original Game of Thrones TV show, which was quite an interesting sort of like twist on it. Is that your take, that they just wanted to have some continuity in this?
Well, I think that's a big part of it. Continuity is important for them, but I guess I don't have a strong opinion on that. Yeah, I think they do it's a good way to show continuity. It was like a clever way to keep that without a whole lot of effort and showing that. But I think it's you look to Star Wars as an example. Star Wars kept their theme song throughout, and it just worked. A joke I've seen that I really appreciate is they asked him for a new song. Mm-hmm. And a week before the show came out, he just sent them the old. Was like, "That's your song. I already did the perfect song. Why do I need to make another one?" And they had no choice but to accept it because it was a week out. But no,
is that true?
I'm just making that. No, I'm making that up. Okay. Entirely making that up. That was. It would be hilarious if that's what he did. It was like a real boss move. He's like, "What are you gonna do? Go get another song?" Yeah. So, but no, I don't have a strong opinion on it. I think maybe that's just, you're right. They just wanted to keep the familiarity and make it all seem part of one world and put it under one umbrella. And the music is a really good way to do that. So I'm like you. I kind of wanted a new song. I'm not disappointed, but I was kind of hoping for a new one. Maybe I am a little disappointed, but this song is so good. I can't complain.
No, I mean, I would agree. It's hard to complain about it because it is so good. Ballerina just talking about the sort of the continuity issue here, saying the prophecy doesn't line up with the show. The Targaryens do not use that dagger nor destroy the Night King. But I think this is quite an interesting sort of test case for how they are going to try and do this, because clearly the original idea for Aegon the Conqueror being a dreamer comes from George R.R. Martin, but then where it goes with that seems to have come from Ryan Condal. He's cleared things through George R.R. Martin, talked to him, and all the rest of it. But so it was his decision, I'm assuming, to have that dagger and say, this is the dagger that the prophecy is going to be written on. Now, I can only assume that is The prophecy does not say use this dagger to kill the big baddie in a couple of centuries' time. So it's just trying to make a link across between where this show is and where Game of Thrones TV show ended. So it's an idea that starts with George R. R. Martin and sort of like goes away and then comes back again. So clearly, Arya killing the Night King isn't going to happen in the books. And the cat's paw dagger probably also won't be that significant in the books. I mean, who knows? George R. R. Martin may include things we do not know. But the idea that is going to be the thing which does the damage at the very end of it seems quite a long shot in the books at the moment.
I agree.
But I mean, how's your... Because you've had these conversations both with George R. R. Martin and Ryan Condal about this idea of the two canons, and this is, I think, the first time that we've actually sort of seen it action. Something which has come from George R. R. Martin is appearing in the new show, but the showrunner is clearly trying to tie it in to the other show, not just the books. How are you seeing that working?
Yeah, I think, to back up just a little bit, I'd say that we don't actually know what Aegon's dream was. We know what he communicated, and that's fraught with issues. If you've ever tried to explain your dream to someone else, you know that you might not be properly communicating it, because it would have been images and thoughts and ideas, not things that are easily put into words. So whether or not it actually aligns with the prophecy, I think there's room for wiggle room there, I'd say. But yeah, and with as far as canon, yeah, you're right. There is a distinct difference here. What Ryan has done fits the books. It could work, I think, just taking out maybe some of the dagger stuff, but just passing down the prophecy using other means. Because yeah, like you said, the inscription on the dagger was a way to maybe help keep it more permanent, an item that the Targaryens would hold on to that was a little more precious and long lasting than scrolls or books. Because as we saw, Signs and Portents, perfect example, that book did not make it into current times, or at least not all of it, or at least not in a way that we've seen. But this dagger, even though the version of the dagger in the books probably doesn't have an inscription on it, it did nonetheless survive, which you would expect a Valyrian steel dagger to be better at passing through the centuries than some paper. So yeah, so I think that it's really fascinating. We're gonna maybe see George develop this a little more, or do it in a different way. Rhaegar says a Song of Ice and Fire in his vision, or in the vision that Dany sees, and he seems to be looking right at Dany when he says that. So Dany still finds out. She still gets the message one way or the other, whether it's through a dagger, whether it's through something else. In this case, it seems to be dreams of her own. So I think they align pretty well. And given the nature of the supernatural, as we've already discussed under other contexts in this episode, there's a lot of wiggle room when you get into the supernatural, especially when you're talking about other people's interpretations of things that we didn't personally see. We don't know what Aegon's dreams were, so it's hard for us to be too critical or maybe not too critical, but it's hard for us to take it literally and to say, oh, this is definitely what he dreamed, given it's the telephone game. He told his heirs and they told their heirs, and now Viserys knows, and he's read this dagger, and who knows what was actually said. So I think that gets a lot of wiggle room between the canons.
Exactly. And what's on the dagger is quite pithy. It's just like one sentence. And, but earlier we get Viserys giving this, I mean, very poetic version of on the cold winds from the north, or what, I can't even remember exactly what it was talking about, but it was the words he used, but it was a lot more flowery than that. And it does feel like there are a few different things that have come down. We've got the concept of the prince that was promised. We've got the concept of the Song of Ice and Fire. We've got this concept of a Targaryen needing to be on the Iron Throne, and the Seven Kingdoms needing to be united. So there's lots of concepts which are thrown out there by all of this without there being a page of a book written down saying this is exactly what it is. You have to pay attention to these exact words. So there is, as you say, there's a lot of wiggle room, I think, that we can go with on this.
Wheezy Squeezebox says rats ate the scrolls.
That's why there's all the rats. Yeah,
the maesters
absolutely.
ate up the magical scrolls through the rats. Yes, that's perfect.
Andrew K pointing out we're very close to 4,000. So yeah, if you are, if
we're one donation away.
Then please do donate. Alzheimer's care and research is such an important charity, such important work. So if you're enjoying the stream, if you've got this far, if you've got however nearly 2 hours into watching us chatting about this, and you wish to say a little thank you, this is the way I'd love you to say thank you. Let's go to a question from Andy Q. Saying, I was curious about Damon's apparent impotency issue, and then watched your video on Aegon's apparent infertility. That was another one of our collaborations, actually. It got me thinking about the letter from Dawn. This was the one that Aegon the Conqueror got. There are many good theories about it. My thought is, could this letter suggest that Aenys, I got told very clearly by a lot of people that my initial pronunciation of Aenys was not helpful to them, so that's where I'm going with now. Aenys is Dornish, from what I can understand. Rhaenys was in Dorne in 7 AC, the year her son was born. Aegon found Rhaenys there alone when he arrived in Sunspear. Perhaps she conceived him there. Maybe Aegon agreed to peace, so the knowledge that his heir was a bastard wouldn't get out. Though this doesn't explain why he went to Dragonstone. It's just a wild theory with all these themes of bastards and infertility coming through. Well, so there's a couple of layers here. Before we get onto the Aegon bit, what's your take on Damon? Because one throwaway remark about, or hint that maybe he's impotent in some way is okay, that's fine. But there's been 2 or 3 of these now.
Yes.
Why do you think they're doing this? Is this do you think this is a plot point? This wasn't in the books, unless I completely missed it. There wasn't a hint of this at all. In fact, there were even when Mysaria was pregnant, we were told. This is a deliberate decision, character decision by the showrunners. Why? What do you think they're trying to show us here?
I really don't know. I think maybe it's one way to show a provocative way to show something that he has a secret, something to give him a bit of a chip on his shoulder, something to make him give him something to prove. For example, all that talk to Rhea Royce when he says he blames her. Right? He frames it that she's ugly, that a child couldn't possibly survive in her womb, all this just invective as a way to cover his own inability to finish, as she's put it. So it's a really interesting way to give him this aggressive, hyper masculine guy, to give him something, a secret or something that he would be ashamed of, or something that you wouldn't expect. I mean, it was a surprise for us all, and it's a really interesting way to frame a character like this. I don't know what they're doing with it long term, because as we know, he is going to have kids. So, I mean, presumably he is in the show. He does in Fire and Blood. I don't actually know for sure that he will in the show, but I assume he will. It's hard to imagine that Bela and Rhaena won't be his. So, I in terms of long term, I think it won't be a problem. Maybe he needs to. It shows his guilt. That's one thing they talked about in behind the episode. Ryan Condal said with Rhaenyra that he knew what he was doing was wrong, and that was a part of it. So it shows that that's a really important thing. It shows that he does have a conscience, which I think a lot of people would maybe think he doesn't, that he's really amoral and just does what he wants. Which is sort of true, but I think there are limits, and he does have a bit of a conscience that mostly he ignores his conscience a lot of times, but it spikes at important moments and it sneaks up on him maybe in times when he's not expecting it. And that may show up later, especially when he's older and he listens to that voice more. He's a little wiser. Maybe he's had his own children. He's suffered his own losses. Maybe he's seen a big part of Fire and Blood that's all subtext, but very prominent subtext is how much Aemond is like him. And he sees Aemond in himself, or himself in Aemond. And that's a part of why he confronts Aemond later. He's like, only I can take care of me. And I need to do that because we can't have another me inflicted on the realm. And that maybe is a way for him to grow and mature a bit and maybe have not a full turn, but something to just keep him human. And, you know, he's got a lot of darkness in him, but he's also got a conscience, and he does care about certain people. And maybe it's, maybe there's something dragony about it. Maybe he needs the woman to be stronger than him, someone that's more powerful than him. But Rhaenyra, at that point, Rhea Royce wasn't, but Lena, maybe he just sees that respect. He respects Lena that much. I don't know. Maybe I'm eager to see what else they do with it, because honestly, I haven't given a straight answer here, if I'm being critical of myself.
No, I don't think there is one.
There is one. Yeah.
It's an odd one, because we know in the books he has children, and there's never a hint that these aren't his children. So presumably they're not going to go down the route of saying that those aren't his children later. That would be quite a big shift away from the book, I think. Which means that they probably have to drop it after this episode, really, if they're going to. So yeah, it's quite an odd one. I can only assume this is the humanizing Damon thing. This is the because in the book he comes across as being just on a power grab, just always out there causing trouble and chaos. And what they've shown with the care and love he has for Viserys and Rhaenyra, that he has got a softer side. It's just that most people don't see it. And this also shows a vulnerability there that, it just humanizes him a little bit. So I can only assume this was a character decision they made, that they didn't want Damon just to be this. I'm sure Matt Smith would have loved playing it as sort of like Damon Targaryen on steroids, just running around doing crazy stuff all the time, with no moral qualms. But this adds an extra layer into who he is that I think Matt Smith incidentally is delivering it wonderfully. But it's showing that he's a human.
There might be a modern term that applies here, which is the term demisexual, which is when you can really only be intimate with someone that you're really close to, that you actually have a strong connection to, that you love. So that would explain why Damon he couldn't do with Rhea, because he didn't love her at all. They were enemies with Mazaria or other sex workers. There's no real connection there. With Rhaenyra, just on a night out, she's too young. They're not ready. But when they're married and they're on more equal footing, and that might be it might be something along those lines. I'm not saying they wouldn't come out and say that, but that kind of fits, I think, because Lena, I think he's going to genuinely love her, and that would help explain why he's able to be intimate with her and not these other people. Yeah.
Agreed. We've just hit 4,000. Thank you very much. Very generous. It's I always think with these things, it's all down obviously to the generosity of the people who donate. So if you have donated, thank you. I haven't been able to read out every name. The chat goes far too quickly, I'm afraid. I'm just a humble Robert, and I'm chatting with Aziz, and I can't read everything that happens as it's going through. But thank you very much for that. I hugely appreciate it. So let's push on now. I think we can definitely make it to over 5,000 before the end of the season. But the second half of that question was about Aegon the Conqueror. Now,
yes,
the video that we did. And this was an Aziz idea. I should probably give credit where credit is due. This idea that Aegon's two children, there were question marks over both of them that are not just, this isn't just fan question marks, these were in-world question marks about both of them. And I think we sort of really came around to the conclusion that yes, there were question marks, but there's not enough to conclude fully either way.
Yes.
Now, the suggestion in this question is that if we get Rhaenys, the queen that he loved more, or loved spending time with more at least, she had a child first, but the rumors were that this wasn't Aegon's. It gets a few mentions in Fire and Blood. He doesn't seem to be like, doesn't come across very much like Aegon. His character's quite different. He's not very sort of Targaryen-y, and he does seem to share characteristics with the kind of men that Rhaenys used to hang around with. So could it be that she had a lover in Dorne? She was down in Dorne a huge amount of the time, mostly burning it has to be said. But could it be that she had a lover in Dorne, and that actually that letter to Aegon was that led to him calling off the war with Dorne? That's the important point. He got a letter, and the result was that he ended the war with Dorne. Could it be a threat to reveal the truth that his son and heir was not actually his? Do you think there's a chance of that?
It's an interesting idea. Yeah, I do think it's hard to rule out. Like a lot of theories, that's what it comes down to. First thing we try to do with a theory is try to rule it out based on basic information. And if it can't pass that test, then there's no much reasoning going on other than if you just want to have fun with it. But so we can't just outright eliminate it. But the one problem I see is that if Rhaenys was trying to make sure they had a child, if there's questions of her husband's ability to actually father children, and she was trying to get pregnant on the sly and pass the child as her husband's, I'm skeptical she would choose a Dornish person because of looks. She would want to maybe ensure the child looked Targaryen, and if she hooking up with a Dornish person is anti to that goal, you would want to hook up with someone that looked Valyrian, and she didn't have too many. There's not a lot of Valyrian people looking around, but there's enough. It shouldn't be that hard, especially on Dragonstone and maybe on Driftmark. But hey, maybe there's a Valyrian-looking person in Dorne. Maybe there's like a Dane or someone that married into House Dane, and occasionally there's a Dane with silver hair. So you can't rule it out. I mean, House Uller isn't super far from Starfall. It's in that southwestern portion of Dorne. So, and if there's also a lot of merit to the idea that if she's going to cheat on Aegon with the idea of getting pregnant on the sly, going really far away is a good idea. Going really far from Dragonstone, keeping that under wraps. Yeah, I mean, that does make sense to keep that like as far away from the Red Keep as possible. Like, there's some merit to that part of this idea for sure. So, yeah, I also will applaud that this is as far as I know. And I hear a lot of theories. I'm sure you do too. This is a completely original idea, as far as I know. I've never seen this idea. So that I think anyone who makes up a new theory, whenever someone makes up a theory that I consider plausible that I haven't heard before, I'm always extra appreciative because we've been around the block a few times.
Indeed. So that's Andy Q. Well done. I mean, I've not heard of that before, and if it's a theory I've not heard before, and also I can't immediately say, well, no, then I think that there's definitely some merit in it. I think there are other solutions out there that work better for me personally. I did do a video on this ages ago. If you want to find my thoughts on what was in that letter, I think that the only thing I would add to that, which we've gained from in the light of this, the House of the Dragon, is the idea that Aegon the Conqueror had this dream that you had to unite the Seven Kingdoms and you had to rule over, the Targaryens had to rule over it all. So him calling off the war against Dorne and basically saying, that's it, I accept the fact that I am not going to achieve what I think is necessary for the survival of humanity is much bigger than we thought it was before, if we're taking the show canon here. Because beforehand, we thought that you can actually sort of understand why they've been trying to attack Dawn, subjugate Dawn for a long time. Yes, his beloved sister wife has died, but also literally tens of thousands of other people, and there's no hint that anything they do is ever going to succeed in subjugating Dawn. So you can kind of understand why he might have ended the war. But if he genuinely thought that it was the role of the Targaryens to unify the Seven Kingdoms, then it would take something massive for him to say, okay, that's it. I give up on that idea. So that's the only tweak we've got. And this is show canon, obviously not book canon, but it adds an entirely new level of gravitas to that decision. And it's the only time, incidentally, that we know that Aegon himself bled on the Iron Throne. So if we're taking this, I did an Iron Throne, does the Iron Throne judge Kings and Queens video a while ago. If you take this idea that it judges Targaryen rulers, as I speculated, not on whether we might think that they're good or bad rulers, but on whether they're meeting the standards that Aegon himself set to be uniting the Seven Kingdoms and keeping the family together. That is the only time that happened to him, when he admitted, I'm not about to unite the Seven Kingdoms. We've got one more question from my patrons, so now is a good time to drop a few other things into the chat if you want. We'll try and pick up a few more questions from the chat as we're going through. A few people asking in the chat, how long are we going to go on for, if we're going to go all the way up to the show. No, we're not going to go all the way up to the show. We've got one more question and a few more things from the chat to go. I want to give everybody a chance for a little break before the show itself airs. But let's go to the last question we've got from one of my patrons, from Catherine Furseth, saying, hi Robert, I guess we'll see some dragon binding in the coming episodes. What do you think we have or will learn about dragon binding that we didn't know before? That a young girl like Laena can claim or bond with the oldest and fiercest dragon seems kind of odd, and also that someone else hasn't tried the same. Perhaps Viserys was right, that dragons are a force that man shouldn't have trifled with. What is going on between Targaryens and dragons? Well, just on one sort of nomenclature issue here, I think there's a difference between dragon binding and dragon bonding. So dragon binding seems to be, we've got dragon binder, which is that magical horn that Euron has in A Song of Ice and Fire. That seems to be about controlling dragons, from what we've heard. Dragon bonding seems to be forming a bond with a dragon. So I think it's a subtle difference, but that seems to be there. But yes, we will see at some point, whether it's with Laena and Vhagar or whether it's one of the other things. Certainly, when we get to the dragon seeds, we will see this dragon bonding thing happen, and we'll hopefully learn some stuff there. What do you think, Aziz? What do you think? Do you think we'll learn something new? Do you think they're hinting at anything new with the sort of the dragon Targaryen relationship?
I think they might give us some minutia that we may not be expecting, or clarify some things, show some things that are known that we've never seen before. Because they're definitely going to be eggs, and at least Jace, probably Luke, are going to get their dragons this episode, I think. And that's scary, because these are children being given what we've referred to as small nuclear weapons, flying fortresses, bombers. Yeah, this is not something you would really normally want to have in the hands of a child. It's talking about too much power at too young of an age. Well, there you go. But sticking to the question, I'm getting a little out of bounds here. Vhagar was said, they revealed in episode 2 that that Vhagar's location isn't known. So that explains why no one has tamed Vhagar, because they don't really know where she is. And Laena suggests that she's on Driftmark, and if she's on Driftmark, then that's House Valerian's island. You're not going to have a lot of people just stopping by to look for Vhagar without permission. So that's maybe kind of an isolated location for her to be existing in. Yeah, good. That was a good clarification on dragon bonding versus dragon binding. There's also dragon banding, which is when they form a musical group, and dragon bending, which comes from the Avatar universe, where there's fire bending, water bending, and dragon bending. Yeah, there's all sorts of
all sorts of
here.
fun and games with dragons. Yeah. So I think we will see something. This is the kind of thing that is there. I was fascinated that they've been enjoying doing through this show. I was fascinated by that line from Viserys, though, about saying this is a force we should never have been tampering with, or words to that effect, because that is completely opposite to what any other Targaryen would say that we've come across. And he's the one who is being shown to care about the history and reading the history books about old Valyria, he actually seems to know and understand, and he did bond with Balerion the Black Dread, the greatest dragon in Westerosi history, only for about a year, I think, unfortunately, before Balerion died. But he knows stuff that others perhaps don't. So I do wonder whether they're going to give us a little bit more there. Why is it that Viserys thinks that? Because surely also, if you think your role is to keep the Seven Kingdoms together, having dragons is a good way of doing that. That's simply quite a practical thing. But yeah, they've been dropping in having the Dragon Keepers. I'm loving the Dragon Keepers with their speaking Valyrian all over the place.
Cool.
That's
nice
great.
touch.
We've got the Dragon Pit. We're going to be seeing a bit more about that. We've got visually different types of dragons. They've given us the little the footrest thing that you can put there, that they sort of drive a bolt into the neck of the dragon at a young age. They have put a lot of thought into the dragons. So when we get to the dragon bonding scenarios, this will be a thing that they have put active thought into. This isn't just somebody's going to jump on a dragon, it's all going to be okay. So the fact that they've been holding back from that, they could have shown us stuff earlier. They could have shown us Lionel bonding with Sea Smoke or something like that. Yeah. And they haven't. So they're clearly holding it back for an event of some kind.
In fact, we know they cut the original scene of Laena taming Vhagar. It was going to be in episode 2 when she talks about it. When she brought it up to Viserys, saying, "Where is Vhagar?" And he's like, "I don't know." And she says, "I think we hear rumors and singing on Driftmark." It's supposed that was going to be the episode where she claimed Vhagar. We were going to see that, but they cut that scene. So that does imply what you're saying, that they wanted to maybe save it for something else. You'll notice that's also the shortest episode of the season, so you can see why. They planned on having that, and originally they were going to have Alicent and Viserys' wedding in that same episode. So those are the two scenes. Maybe we'll get those on the extras or something.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually now starting, just while we're talking to make me wonder whether they're going to build up to Aemond as being this is the dragon bonding moment that we are going to be learning about, because that is quite a dramatic moment.
Yeah, we're going to get that one scene from the trailer that we've been seeing since the very first trailer in this next episode.
Absolutely.
I guess that's him, Aemond.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the last question from my patron. So I just have a very quick flick through the chat. Aziz, if there's anything that you see there, please just sort of pipe up and let me know. C. McBroom saying, will we see the switch from Alicent rejecting Targaryen ways to embracing them on screen? Do you think Larys or anyone will have influenced her towards this way? I mean, I think this is an interesting one, because they've been setting this up as a difference between Targaryens and Valyrians and sort of the faith of the Seven and the High Towers, the oldest family in Westeros. But at some point, clearly, the Alicent's children get dragons and have to be a bit Targaryen-y. So I have a feeling they'll probably just sort of fudge that a little bit, but there is a compromise there, because Alicent doesn't like the idea of flying on a dragon. She said that quite early on, and clearly the Maesters, who are connected in with the High Towers, they're not big fans of the dragons. So it's a matter of compromise in order to, probably because she just wants to protect their lives.
I totally agree. It's the combination of power and fear. Making her do things that she wouldn't normally be able to do. Fear of what's going to happen to her children if she doesn't do this thing that makes her uncomfortable, that she's kind of against on religious and moral grounds. But her fear for their lives outweighs that. And she has the power to actually do something about it. Unlike most people who are scared for giant fire-breathing monsters, she actually has the power to supply her children with them. So most people don't. So yeah, so I think that's a really interesting, like, overarching theme of the show, and maybe of a lot of different Game of Thrones ideas, is that what power does to you. And this is one of those things. Alicent's going to compromise her values to save her children, and because she can.
Yes. All the artsy saying, everyone asks how can Laena tame Vhagar, but don't bat an eye with Aemond. He tamed Vhagar just as quickly, almost as if George needed the Greens to have a big dragon. Well, yes, exactly. He did need the Greens to have a big dragon. I mean, I don't know. Maybe people have been. I've not seen people querying how she could have tamed Vhagar so much as wanting to see it, because Vhagar is so. At this stage, this is the biggest dragon we have or will see in this show. Maybe we'll go back and see Balerion at some point, but Vhagar is legendary and should be legendary. So that's why people are wanting to see how this can happen.
Yeah, at this point, Vhagar should be like 180-ish years old or something like that. Just really old, 170-ish. Yeah, really old.
Yeah, so predates the conquest. Was there one of the the dragons that was? This is Visenya's dragon. This is a legendary dragon. Is there anything else you want to pick up on, Aziz?
I'm not sure. I guess not. We covered a lot today. I'm very excited for the episode. Yeah. One thing about dragon riding. I think the one thing we see is very common in the real world. If you are able to project confidence to animals, they respond to that. We saw that with the crocodile hunter and lots of other nature people, animal. If you know what you're doing and you don't show that fear, dogs are a good example. If you project that confidence, the animals pick up on it. They know if you're not scared, they're like, well, he's not scared of me, then maybe I should be scared of him. It sounds weird with giant dragons, but it's a real world thing. I mean, elephants, big cats, lots of animals there's some animals, doesn't matter what you do, they will come eat you. But I'm sure there's some dragons like that. But that's how animals like Vhagar can be tamed by a child, by a young person. That's a brave kid. I mean, simple as that. It may not something you can just do, but there are people that are really brave. And you're a highborn person who comes from a family of dragon riders, then you kind of grow up thinking that's what your family does. Maybe it's a little easier to see where that bravery comes from.
Good point. Why don't you remind everybody where they can find History of Westeros on the internet?
Cool. Yeah, we have a website, historyofwesteros.com. We're on YouTube as History of Westeros. Our main point of contact is over on podcast side. If you listen on Spotify or iTunes or Google Play, we are also History of Westeros over there, and you can consume us in all those places or whichever one is best for you. And we're doing twice a week during the season. Monday, spoiler-free reviews. Saturday, spoiler-filled episodes. And occasionally other things like Achilles and Damon or videos with Robert here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on, Aziz. It's always an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
I don't have to worry at all. I can just hand it over, and Aziz can happily answer any questions thrown at him. I'm going to make you disappear for just one moment so I can point at the screen. If you're watching this back a little bit later, appearing somewhere around here will be a link to other live streams that I've done. Appearing somewhere around here is a link to my Patreon page, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. Thank you so much to everyone who donated. I hugely appreciate it. Thank you, moderators. You did an amazing job, as you always did. Thank you, patrons. And thank you, Aziz. And I think that's all the thank yous I need to do. I will be back on Thursday for my Rings of Power. We're up to episode 6 there.
Only
So
3
yeah,
left.
yeah, not too far to go on that one. So that's where I'll be my Thursday live stream, and I'll be back next Sunday for another one of these live streams. Okay, thanks everyone. Take care, and I shall see you again soon.